I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Congressman Mike Gallagher, chairman of the Select Committee in the House on Engagement with the Chinese Communist Party, and the most controversial man in America this morning. Boy, did you screw up my show. I was prepared to talk to you about the fact that Friday, the Cavaliers bested the Bucks in Milwaukee on their home court, 112-100, and that right now the Cavaliers are in second place and the Bucks are in third place, and then you go and vote against Mayorkas impeachment and blow up my whole shtick. So thanks a lot.
Well, listen, you've been giving Langford so much crap on Twitter. I just figured I should create a diversion and draw your fire away from him for at least a morning. So
I like James Langford. I like him. He got it wrong. Now, let's begin by the fact you have a Wall Street Journal editorial, which is very persuasive, explaining why you voted no on the Mayorkas impeachment. Why don't you explain to the audience why you did so?
Well, the op-ed focuses on the constitutional questions. If I could explain maybe the practical issue that I don't really get into there. Let's assume Mayorkas gets impeached. I actually think he will once they figure out a way to get all the members present. I concede the fact that the border is an unmitigated disaster. When I was a freshman member of the Homeland Security Committee, I chaired the special task force on denying terrorist entry into the United States. It was a problem in 2017. It got worse such that President Trump declared a national emergency on the southern border. It has gotten exponentially worse under President Biden. It's a humanitarian tragedy. It's a national security threat. I concede all of these points. I voted for every hawkish immigration bill and against every amnesty bill that I've been confronted with in my 7 years in Congress. I concede that point. But ask yourself, if Mayorkas gets impeached, or when he gets impeached, what changes at the southern border? How practically, what problem will this solve? And furthermore, let's tease that logic out a little bit. If two Trump impeachments and failed convictions in the Senate, which is of course what would happen with Mayorkas, made Trump stronger, would it not further embolden Mayorkas and the Biden administration in this border mess? So I just don't see what practical problem this actually solves at the southern border. It will not fix anything at the southern border.
And the Republicans are counting on Chuck Schumer not bringing up the impeachment proceedings. But you're pointing out he very well may. He might invite the impeachment managers to come over and make their case, and they might they control the floor. They might just shred us, right?
Well, either way, what would change at the border? Or let's consider the third scenario, which is like the probability of it is maybe less than 1%. Let's say Mayorkas is actually convicted in the Senate, right? Would that change the Biden administration's policy on the southern border? And I think that's the thrust of at least one of my points in the op-ed. President Biden campaigned on an open borders agenda. He immediately, via executive orders, implemented that open borders agenda. Mayorkas is implementing the president's policy, and a brushback pitch against Mayorkas in the form of an impeachment, whether he gets convicted or not, will not change that strategy.
Let me give you the counter argument, Congressman. Yeah. It's political. We wanted to underscore we being Republicans want to underscore that the border is open and it's Biden's fault. And that has been underscored, and the bill that we came up with, Senator Langford, is dead, and the chaos is there. Let me play for you what Joe Biden said yesterday, and it's going to be what he says every day. Where's the cut where he talked about the border? Number 3?
Every day between now and November, the American people are going to know that the only reason the border is not secure is Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican friends.
So the counter-argument is the impeachment of Mayorkas would at least give us an opportunity to rebut the president. And I'm sure you heard that on the floor yesterday. Did you hear that argument on the floor, and what's your response to it?
Yeah, I heard that argument and the related argument that, well, the Democrats already lowered the standard for impeachment, therefore, we can't unilaterally disarm. I would say two things. Everything we do is both political and practical and policy, and being political does not absolve you from standing on principle. The second thing is, I don't think that argument would hold with your kids, right? You wouldn't say because someone else did something we didn't like, well, now turnabout is fair play. And furthermore, when you're dealing with something like impeachment, the very fact that we are going back to the 1800s to find precedent and support for our arguments suggests that this vote is not merely a political exercise. This vote will reverberate throughout history, and future Congresses will be looking to this vote to determine whether to impeach someone in the future. And I think this is ultimately the intellectual hurdle I couldn't get over. I fear by further lowering the bar for impeachment and endorsing the principle that you can impeach a cabinet secretary for egregious maladministration in the absence of a crime, and we've never impeached a cabinet secretary before in the absence of a crime, we're pointing a loaded gun at the next Trump administration. And we'll see, of course, the Democrats will exploit this new standard and weaponize it to create chaos and make it impossible, ironically, for Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security to secure the southern border or for us to implement a conservative policy. And so that's my concern. I want to sincerely say I respect everyone on the other side. I get the concerns of the southern border. I share them. And if this actually were to somehow improve the crisis at the southern border, perhaps I would have considered it differently, or if the articles were drafted a little different way. And in particular, I commend Chairman Green, who I truly admire. He's a man of honor. He's a warrior. He's a scholar. I love Chairman Green, and I respect his work. And so it gives me no joy to do this. I just have to stay consistent with the arguments I made defending Trump against the Democrats' weaponization of impeachment.
Now, let me give you the last argument and the most important argument. Parties matter. All right, parties matter. That's how progress is made politically and policy-wise on both levels. And the party was deeply embarrassed yesterday because it did not pass what they thought they were going to, and on the Israel aid as well. And they'll do it next week when Scalise is back. So you could have, in good conscience, said, well, it will pass next week, so I'm going to vote in you could have announced your objection, but also said, I understand the leader, Majority Leader Scalise, is not here, so I will vote as he would and not stop what the party wants. In other words, I am a Republican, I believe in the Republican Party, and we need good, strong parties to advance our agenda, and therefore I, Mike Gallagher, will vote against something I don't believe in.
That seems a little bit like a triple bank shot for me. I mean, I guess I see what you're saying. I'm just not sure it's a principled vote. More to the point, I was not undecided. I went no for over a month. So nobody was surprised about my vote. It's unclear to me why we barreled ahead with a vote, knowing that the votes weren't there.
Well, that's a different question entirely. I'm not talking about party management. I'm just talking about
I played by
party.
the party rules. I played by every rule that the party has put in place for how we should not surprise them for a vote. So we barreled ahead with a vote. We did not need to embarrass ourselves. We could have simply waited until the math was different and gone ahead.
So the argument of comedy, my argument is comedy would say, we're going to win next week, Chairman Gallagher. Why don't you give us your vote this week rather than giving the Democrats a couple of days win? It's kind of not significant for all the reasons you've talked about, but it did embarrass the Republicans, and you're willing to take that heat? Yeah,
again, it gives me no joy. I want to stay, I want to, and maybe this is selfish, I want to stay personally, intellectually consistent with the arguments I've made in the past, and two, I'm genuinely worried about the precedent we're setting, and I fear by further prying open the Pandora's box of perpetual impeachment, we are going to impact the ability of a future Republican presidency and administration to implement border policy.
That is your best argument. So, it is late Roman Republic stuff to innovate with never before tried maneuvers. So that's your best argument. Chairman, while we've got you, 25,000 Chinese came over the border last year. You're not a squish on the border. How many of those 25,000 do you think were sent by the Chinese Communist Party?
The honest answer is we don't know. But as I've said to you before, it's an unusual spike from an unusual population relative to historical trends. You have to assume there's some sort of national security threat here. And we have to shut down the border. We have to shut down the border. Let me remind you, impeaching Mayorkas will not result in shutting down the border or fixing the problem of Chinese nationals or anybody else coming across the border or the fentanyl issue. It is a top priority. It is a matter of national security. And of course, our enemies will seek to weaponize the gaping holes in our southern border.
So let me get you into more trouble. Let me get you into even more trouble. I have been speaking in support of the supplemental this morning. I hope that the Senate passes the supplemental with aid to Ukraine in it. I am a big believer in aid to Ukraine, like Mike Pompeo. Would you vote for a supplemental with aid to Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel, and the United States industrial base for the Defense Department?
It all depends on the final numbers. I think what might make it more palatable is to rebalance the numbers. So plus up Taiwan, $5 billion spread across the Indo-Pacific is not enough. And you could sort of take the number down on Ukraine. But of course, I support clinical assistance to Ukraine. I would add to that, Hugh, as I've talked with you about before, my FIRES Act, which would allow the Defense Department to use the average $10 billion a year it doesn't spend in order to rebuild our critical munitions industrial base. And that consistent $10 billion a year over the course of 5 years would allow us to rebuild our entire arsenal of deterrence, which would be relevant for Taiwan, for Israel, and Ukraine. That's an even simpler fix that would get us past this precarious political moment right now.
I hope that happens. Now, you've used up all your time and you've avoided answering how the Bucks got embarrassed by the Cavaliers. But I think it's pretty extreme to vote against impeachment to avoid talking about the Bucks collapse.
Listen, we live in interesting times, Hugh, and so one must go to extremes to avoid.
Are you going to do media all day today?
And the wrath of the party.
I recommend you go out and talk to everyone about this everywhere, not hide from anyone. Are you just going to be doing media end to end?
The only problem is I don't want to be one of these Republicans that is leveraging this to crap on the party on CNN. I always think that's just like a bad look, and I sincerely respect the people on the other side of the debate. I tried to understand it, and I don't want to do anything to get in the way of what I think is their sincere effort to fix a very difficult problem on the southern border.
Well said. Chairman Gallagher's piece is in the Wall Street Journal. I put it on my X file. Please go and get it. And thank you, Chairman. Next week, the Bucks will be further behind, and you cannot avoid accountability for their collapse forever. Thank you, Chairman Mike Gallagher. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Hugh Hewitt Show. Calls are coming up.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com.